Let's go back now to that first public message today from Iran's new supreme leader. To help us dig deeper into what he had to say, we've reached Amos Hochstein. He served as a White House senior advisor to President Joe Biden, and currently he's a managing partner at TWG Global, an investment company. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Great to be with you.
Part of what we want to focus on, of course, is the message that we heard from the Supreme Leader about the continued disruption when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. Mojtaba Khamenei vowed to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed and keep up the attacks on U.S. bases in the region with other Gulf states. What did you make of that message?
So I made a few things of that message. Number one, the most critical piece, that it was not in his voice, nor was it a video. So since they've selected and announced that he is the new leader, Mojtaba Khamenei has not been seen or heard in public. And so I think a lot of Iranians are wondering, is he really the leader? Is he really there? Is he injured? And so on. So I think it was striking that it took several days for him to have any statement and that he didn't do it in his voice or in his image. Second, the message itself. Look, I think the Iranians know that the one area that they have been able to be successful is to disrupt the American and Israeli and the regional plan of war by disrupting the economy. They know that the polling in the United States is not very good around the war to begin with, the lowest it's ever been for any war. And so they're trying to push that advantage. They cannot possibly respond to the Israelis and the Americans on a military-to-military basis. They're too weak for that. So they look for the things that they can do, which is disruption.
And when we talk about that disruption, certainly it is of a global scale because of the amount of oil, certainly, that comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And when we look at how the U.S. president is reacting here, I want to point to what he posted online, saying that the U.S. is the largest oil producer in the world. And so far, when oil prices go up, we make a lot of money. He went on to sort of elaborate on that his greater interest and importance is stopping an evil empire. I mean, what do you make of those remarks there from the U.S. president and how Americans might be reacting to that?
Look, I led President Biden's energy efforts in the lead up and the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the last time we had a major energy crisis. This is by far the greatest energy crisis the world has ever seen, greater than 1973, the OPEC boycott on the West. And I think part of the issue is it's not just about oil. We keep talking about oil, but it's far greater than that. The Arabian Gulf and the countries there have become critical to the whole supply chain of energy. Oil, natural gas in the form of LNG, 20% of the market for both. But then it's also the products, diesel and jet fuel and shipping fuels, bunkering, and fertilizers. And so all of those products are now constrained. It is true that the U.S. is a big producer, but we don't have sovereign companies. So we, quote unquote, don't make more money. The oil companies make more money in the United States when prices go up, but because consumers are paying for it. So Americans are paying more for gasoline, almost $1 more than they did before the war. They're paying more than $1 more for diesel. And remember, that's tied to food prices. But more importantly, Arti, is what you said. This is a global issue. Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Vietnam, Thailand, South Korea are all facing extreme shortages that will affect their economies. Now, two things can be true at the same time. Iran is an evil regime that massacred its own people when they rose up in protest. They have had more American, Muslim, and regional blood on their hands than any other regime. It is also true, however, that this economic disruption is one that was clearly not planned for as well as it needed to be, and will threaten the continuation of the war in its form and duration. So responses need to be achieved, and they have to have some new solutions to be able to unlock the straits.
So certainly when we're talking about the global impact of it, as you've highlighted as well, certainly that is intended when Iran says it will keep up the strikes on its Gulf nation neighbors and it will keep up the strain on the Strait of Hormuz as well. That is meant to apply pressure to U.S. and Israeli forces to stop with this conflict. Do you think it will have the intended effect on whether it is reducing what we are seeing in terms of the intensity of this conflict or ending it altogether so that sort of normalcy, and when I'm talking about that, I mean the economy and the way it was before this conflict, could somewhat be restored?
I don't see a scenario in which the intensity goes down to address it, because you're either in or you're not. So either the war continues at a ferocious intensity as it has, or it comes to a conclusion. I don't see the United States or Israel ending this conflict in a position where it is today. But I think several days from now, if they continue the bombardment, remember, Iran could exact pain from worldwide consumers, but it is also suffering great hits to its own country, its own infrastructure, and its own ability to survive into the future. So I think at some point you get to a place where the United States and Israel will declare a certain kind of victory. Whether it's my best assumption is that can't happen before next week, sometime mid to late next week, and knowing that it would take some global economic pain, but put it into a perspective of time. I think if it goes on more than another week, the supply chain disruption globally will have a long tail, meaning that even if the war ends, it will take weeks and months before it gets sorted out. If you remember the 1970s, the disruption only lasted for 6 months, but its effects were felt for years later until the end of the decade. So I think these things take a while. LNG out of Qatar is right now at zero. It probably would take somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks to restart it. And so the entire global system is right now disrupted, and it won't be a flip of a switch to bring it back on. And so I think the tough job here is for the United States and Israel to figure out, how do we get to a victory, even if it doesn't achieve all the goals that we had originally planned, which I don't really know what they were, to be honest. They weren't explained very well. But the Israelis certainly did say that the goal was a regime change. I don't think that's in the cards anymore, or not likely anymore. But I do think it's possible to see a result that allows the president to declare victory and end the war.
You know, as we discuss further sort of the pressure that is being applied because of the strain on the Strait of Hormuz, I know that there had been some talk from the U.S. president that has now been, of course, sort of something that will not be happening, the escorts of oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. But there is now some reporting suggesting that the White House might consider temporarily waiving the Jones Act. That, of course, would allow for goods to be shipped between U.S. ports to move on ships that aren't built or flagged and based in the U.S. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that the Biden administration took a similar action back in 2021. So is that something, that a tool that could be used here that could help alleviate some of that pressure?
I do think, frankly, I'm surprised that they haven't done it already, waiving of the Jones Act, in order to allow for, in the United States, we have a funny thing where we export oil and we export gasoline and other products from one part of the country, and we import from the Middle East and Europe in another part of the country, and we import a lot from Canada. So I think to make things, to control the price increases, you can waive the Jones Act. You can maybe even tie it in with some restrictions that they're considering on exports. But I think that's only will impact on the margins inside the United States. It will do nothing for the global supply system. And so the United States and Canada are relatively immune from shortages because both countries are such big producers. We are not immune to the price increases. The rest of the world is not immune from shortages. And you cannot go for too long with disrupting such a huge level of product without having knock-on effects on the global economy. So I think you can solve a couple of problems, but they don't solve the overall issue. And look, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates were very smart and creative And thankfully, they invested in infrastructure that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. We would be in much worse shape if they hadn't done that. And that is working well. It is still only 50% of what the original products that were going through that before the war. So I think we have a long way to go here, and the administration needs to figure out a way to allow at least a portion of products to go through the Strait of Hormuz. It cannot remain closed for much longer.
Mr. Hochstein, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
It's good to be with you.
That is former White House senior advisor to President Joe Biden, Amos Hochstein in Washington.